Hi, hello, welcome back to the conclusion of the Super Robot Wars R Fiona Excellence Solo Challenge run. If you missed or are missing part 1, you can find a link to it up in the info widget or down in the description below. I do go in depth about the ground rules of this challenge in that video, but if you would like a refresher or you just haven't watched it, here's a brief summary. First, I'm only allowed to use one unit this run, that's going to be the Excellence and all of its many forms, and also one pilot. My choice of main character was Fiona, but Rao would have been acceptable too. Second, no other unit's going to be able to contribute anything meaningfully to a scenario clear. There are some exceptions to this broadly, and there's also a few case-by-case examples, but we'll talk about those when we get to each of those sections. And third, I issued this challenge because I want to think, not because I want to cheat, so no glitches or skips or anything like that allowed. In all ways other than my unit selection, I would like this playthrough to look and function like it were an average playthrough. I think that about covers all the basics. If you have any questions, or you catch a discrepancy, feel free to meet me in the comments. I am champing at the bit to talk about these games. But let me not get in the way of myself, and I'm going to return you to Scenario 19 was a bit of a trouble at first, since the Machine Generals also have that same AI as Edwin did from Scenario 7. Let's call it Chaser AI, how about? Defined as ignoring the MC and targeting battleships. So because of this Chaser AI, I needed to push them as far as possible, as fast as possible. If I can engage them around the garden area, they don't seem to see the battleship as potential targets, but any closer and they are charging. The Lagoo also kind of presents a problem, as it will be destroyed by the Dendo if I don't get to it first, and that feels a little bit of a cheating solution to me, so I'm going to need to spend a Valor to make that happen. It's a spirit that I would really much prefer to save for one of the Machine Generals because of how they're rushing the battleships, but it's going to be a necessary cost to fulfill my stipulations. Once it falls, the Machine Generals are the focus of the rest of this scenario, with the chaff dying on their own turns. Of the three, Giga Gourmet is easily the least cooperative as it's the most likely to enter this Chaser AI. He is also just prone to not attack Fiona like how many of the other bosses were doing, even if they could see an attack on their enemy phase. So he's got to be the first to go. Absolute is absolutely the next priority for much the same reasons as Gourmet, but they seem to enter Chaser AI a little bit less often. Then Witter is going to be third because he's the most cooperative, as he's perfectly fine inviting me to punch him on his turn. None of the generics have any problems and they just charge straight into the center. It's really just the bosses here. You can see that I do start the fight in the middle of this garden area, and just between turns they sort of manage to push me back into this bottom right hand corner. So things are a little bit dicey at the end of this scenario. I know what I just said about the Lagoo, but letting enemies retreat versus letting the scenario destroy them, it feels a little bit different. I'll allow it this time. Really, it is a game mechanic, and I am using it tactically, and that's kind of the whole point of the challenge, so I can't be too upset about it. Here it is, the payoff we've all been waiting for those weird Gigant HP points I spent at the beginning of the game. Scenario 20 starts in an unwinnable position for this challenge. I knew I was going to need to get creative to not hand-wave this opening, and I'm pretty satisfied with the answer that I've reached. Here's the problem. You were given a pilot named Former Asame, and she shows up in a unit that's dictated by what happened during the tutorial Gundam round split. That means that she's going to inherit any of the upgrades that come from the associated unit, either the Gigan or the mass production new type Gundam, whichever one that Keira's using. You'll notice that there's also another player unit over in enemy range. This is Jared, and he's in the Gundam Double X. That unit has 4,000 HP. I specifically said that I wanted 4,000 HP on the Gigan at the beginning, and the Double X is the reason why. See, so 4 has this one spirit of particular interest here. It's called Self-Destruct. It destroys the unit and deals damage equal to its current remaining HP to all of the 4 orthogonally adjacent tiles around it. That means your units too. 4 is conveniently not orthogonally adjacent to any of the enemies to start, and Jared can move just right next to her. And would you look at that? There are no more player units in enemy range. They didn't see combat, didn't break that rule. They didn't get experience or kills, didn't break that rule. No enemies were damaged, didn't break that rule. As far as I'm concerned, this maneuver is perfectly acceptable within my rule set. I mean, I did make them, so I guess I can say whatever I want about the rules. I do still think it's well within the spirit of the challenge. It doesn't really impact the ease or the difficulty of the scenario at all. Maybe someone's going to claim that I used those units, but I'm hard pressed to say that it's given me any tangible advantage. It, in fact, was a purely detrimental move. It cost me funds at the beginning of the game, and it's going to cost me funds to repair them at the end of this scenario. But, I mean, literally, yes, I did use a spirit, not on the main character, so you be the judge. Also, unfortunately, that's kind of where the interesting part of the scenario ends, though. There is a base, like, what am I supposed to do? Not use it? 2 Gundam wing pilots do show up for a bit, so they're going to need to move to the bottom of the screen, lest the reinforcements that show up in the top left corner attack them, but otherwise, it's just a straight shot to the bosses. I'm going to opt for the gunner frame here, again because of the Versago, the Ashtaron, the Rasvet, the Heavy Arms Custom, the Tetsujin, the Majin, and the Tenjin all have long-ranged attacks. I think that many bosses is enough to warrant the change. Plus, the biggest downside, that 50 energy cost for her best attack, is going to be mitigated now by the Excellence having its max energy, and also that base tile. So, certainly not gone, but definitely a more tolerable cost. At least, that's how I started this scenario, but dealing with the generics is way too rough with so few attacks a turn, and the Batas are just charging right past the long-range Gatling range. So, back to the old standard, now that I'm safely equipped in my favorite frame, the scenario is going to wrap up real fast. Scenario 21 starts pretty simple, just charge ahead, smash the generics, you know the deal. It does start to look a little bit more spooky once the first wave goes down. The Valkyrie and the Dendo are going to show up, and they are definitely a liability. But the bike dies in a cutscene, and the Dendo doesn't stay out, so really, it's just another filler mission. The only really meaningful thing that happens here is the death of Butcher for another time, putting Fiona to level 25, where she's going to learn her last spirit for the run, Bullseye. When used, it guarantees 100% hit for that pilot until the beginning of the next player phase. Being able to carry it through into endgame is definitely useful, except for the fact that there's one very potent part we get in endgame that renders the spirit pretty well obsolete by that point. We are going to pick the Dendo path this time, not the Gundam path again, because the Gundam scenarios this time love throwing units all over the map and practically forcing them to see combat at least once. Normally very interesting, but not today. Scenario 22 sees Fiona attacking the Galfa Empire with a return of the Machine Generals again. This time, though, they are so far away from the Nadeshiko to start that they pose no threat in invalidating our rolls. Fiona is in no risk of dying whatsoever. The scenario might just not play kindly with the challenge that I propose, and I'm going to need to make some esoteric movements or part choices to get things done. Otherwise, business as usual, wrapped it up, moving on. Really? The generals again? I guess there is this added challenge of the Spiral City and the Thugater, but normally the Thugater and its 2 sibling units, the Hypocrisis and the Elios, can pose a big problem because they like to one-shot the weaker members of your team. Turns out, when you only have one very over-leveled character, they don't look much different than any of the other bosses. The squad of bosses does manage to gain some advantage on me by slowly working their way left and down. I really could have solved this problem had I engaged them a bit more northwesterly. The enemies did surround me at one point, and they keep me trapped for a few turns, but moving further from my battleship for a turn or two when just the bosses remained would have felt a bit more secure. I did waste more time trying to destroy the Thugater instead of just letting it run away. The numbers were just such that I got into a loop where Tis would always be a few points shy of a Valor kill. Eventually it worked out, though. The Spiral City does have to be the last one to go, though, since it is like the actual objective of the scenario. Once it's destroyed, the scenario is going to end. Scenario 24, the Rage of the Volcanic Island Base, looks like the battleship, and the turn 2 Combattler Carrot combo would be in the line of fire, but engaging the southern enemies first bought me enough time to clear anyone close to seeing the rest of my team before the bosses could engage. I really planned to sit on the base at the top of the map here, but the name characters crumpled so fast that I genuinely didn't have time to get up there. I do hope the rest of the game doesn't end up being this easy. We've got about a quarter of it left. Turns out, in removing a lot of the complexity of the player choice, you also remove a lot of complexity regarding the enemies too? Who knew? I think I just heard some creaking off screen. This wish couldn't possibly backfire as an entire monkey's paw curls closed, right? Surely it's nothing. Scenario 25, Master Asia dives twice. It does require some precise movement of the battleships to keep the reinforcement Eistavalises on turn 5 from targeting them, but otherwise, no new bosses have shown up to change any of the old plays. One, two, three, four, I declare a super robot war. Scenario 26 is a bit of a throwback to earlier chapters where my only usable unit does not start on the map, but turn 3 is close, so the G Gundam and Getter Boys can move to the east. This scenario is where the run must end if you're opposed to using parts on your non-chosen units. Unless you were soloing with one of these 6, I guess, then I'm not sure. But I gave them all as many movement parts as I could, otherwise the Death Birdies are going to catch up to at least one of them. I know what I said before about getting every boss, but I just want to get these things done with at this point, so I took out Master Asia first, and Elios and Hippocrates left with him. I think I've thoroughly demonstrated my ability to destroy those bosses at this point. I just don't get anything from them at this point. My upgrades are maxed out, there are no more kills that award any abilities. Only EXP matters, and it's so little at this point. If only destroying General Bat, too, made the rest of the Getter enemies retreat. Okay, now, normally Emperor Gore would be taken out in a cutscene by the Shin Getter in order to get its best attack, but in a rarity, I'm actually going to fight it this playthrough. Also, there's 2 relevant parts here after such a long time. Emperor Gore drops the new Super Alloy Z for plus 1500 HP and plus 250 armor, and while I have been face tanking for most of the game, the second part outclasses it dramatically, and it's held by the other primary boss of the stage, Prince Hynel, in the Guardian God Godol. He drops a Haro on death. It is absolutely the best part in the game, hands down, and if you've played a Super Robot Wars game before, you know why. It adds plus 20 mobility, plus 25 accuracy, and it also increases the range of any weapons that already have more than 1 range, and are also not a map attack, by 2. You know, 3 basic and easily named stats: mobility, accuracy, and TROWTAHMTORAANMA, or Trotahamtoranama for short. So, with the Haro acquired, I'm going to transition into mostly being dodge-based. It'll get even more dumb once we pick up the second Haro later in the game. No boss is ever going to touch me again. Oh no, was that another mechanical monkey's paw closing? Anyway, both Gore and Godol are just big bundles of HP, so I camp out on the amusement park to stay safe. I do think the Excellence could have been destroyed if I was a little bit careless here. It can't equip the parts immediately. But I left Gore in his weaker spaceship form while I was destroying Hynel. I think regardless of whichever boss you choose to tackle first, the other one should stay in their base form. Finally, an interesting scenario. Mostly because the bosses are not going to cooperate with me, but still. So, the Nadeshiko has been captured and we need to save it. All you have to do is move the Excellence next to it and it's good as new. Very simple. This scenario is also one of the reasons why I needed to choose Fiona. If I'd picked Rao, Akito is the pilot that needs to move next to the Nadeshiko, and that kind of felt a little bit like cheating. So the wrinkle here is twofold. One is that the Nadeshiko will attack and will try to move adjacent to Fiona, thus triggering the control change. Trouble is, that spawns enemies, one directly adjacent to her. So I need to move next to Yuriko on player phase in order to start the second phase, but I only want to do so after every other enemy has been cleared. Megaborg Zenoya is the only hang-up to actually accomplishing this dodging plan, as she doesn't attack Fiona and she regens 10% of her HP a turn, so I don't have the ability to chip her. Instead, I need to use the difference of movement between her and the Nadeshiko and drag her across the map with me as the Nadeshiko lags behind. She has one more move, so eventually the space will get wide enough between the two that I can start attacking Zenoya. She doesn't have a ton of HP, but because of this awkward clock I have made for myself, I do need to burn a Valor in order to keep her HP down. After that, I want the Nadeshiko as far to the right as possible, otherwise the reinforcements that are going to show up are going to tag her really early. That does mean that the enemy that arrives next to her, Megaborg Nendol, is also going to be near the Rock High Loom, but Nendol has the lowest movement of the Megaborgs at 6, he's tied with Edwin, and after some pretty close calls with the Matanger, the Nendol does go down and I can afford myself a great deal of breathing room. Now it's just a matter of cleaning up Beltori while being in position to also get attacked by the generics on their turn. The generics still don't have Chaser AI, so they're going to fall pretty speedily. I feel like I'm distracting them zipping around their heads like a little insect, doing a better job than Zenoya was at being a bug. Depending on how much of it I cut out, I feel like the scenario could look a lot more annoying than it is, but the real limiting factor here was the unit placement, and that was something I could influence and plan around, so it really was one of the more enjoyable of the stages to complete, actually. I think it, and all the other scenarios that have bosses that just don't attack anything other than the battleship when you only have one player unit on the map, would be made considerably more trivial if you had a pilot who had a spirit, either Zeal or Advance, just one of the two that give you extra turns. Zeal is the one that targets yourself, and Advance is the one that targets anybody. I'm just hypothesizing here, but I suspect that they would make this little dance that I had to do considerably more simple. Okay, well, this is our last route split, and I'm going to opt for the Gundam path here again. I foresee the gear path struggling in two different ways. Both scenario 30 and 31 put the enemies uncomfortably close to the player's starting position, so I suspect I would have spent a great deal of time just trying to keep the battleship out of combat again, but not like in a fun way like we just saw, in a try every tile and see who aggroes where kind of monotonous way. It's also worth saying now, at our last route split, that I did have this like whole graphic planned out for discussing route splits, what funds were available, what parts were available, summing the levels gained, and how they would influence the enemy averages. But no, turns out none of that actually matters. Either there's a right answer because some stages are incompatible with the rule set, and maybe that's just like specifically Fiona, maybe another character could do it. Or because there is so little difference between what you get in the scenarios, and you're really never lacking in funds, the choices just don't matter. It's just more about mitigating time waste. I do plan on doing this kind of challenge for future entries, and I'm really hoping that the route splits are a lot more interesting in the future. These ones were, dare I say, disappointing. 29 and 30 are both jokes at this point. There may be 10 bosses on this map, but none of them can figure out that they need to be shooting the blue-colored robots. So park yourself on a base, get your finger guns ready, and let's do this a rapid fire. Bang, 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 bang. Okay, so the second Frostbrother retreat, so it's only supposed to be 9 kills, but I accidentally made the first Frostbrother retreat, so it's only supposed to be 8 kills. Cool, thanks. I swear I can count. And 30 is not going to fare much better. Haman is maybe the most mobile enemy possible, and she still only has 6 hit. I am going to need to use that bullseye I mentioned before. Well, I don't need to use it. Focus would take me to mid-80s in hit, and that's pretty safe, but I'm not doing anything else with my SP, so. She would be a challenge if none of the team had access to hit and dodge altering spirits. Her plan really works best if none of her enemies can use spirits, and the first part of the scenario is just not demanding enough to warrant spending all of your SP. Or maybe she thought she could just ignore the spirits because she expected to be the main character, and she was told that on the MC squad, they get to use them and the enemies don't. It's really a missed opportunity in my book, though, that both enemies can't use spirits, or that there's like some higher quality bosses that deny your spirit somehow. Saying that out loud, it sounds kinda miserable now. I'd probably be grumbling here about how inconsistent this challenge was, as I'm stuck on coin flips for boss attacks in the latter portions of this game. It's an interesting thought experiment. Does anyone in the comments know if there's other games out there that are going to be like that, where there's maybe more creative or interesting ways of addressing what I'm talking about here? Spirits do make these games, I think, a little too easy. If you know, I'd love to hear it. Okay, finally we are back to interesting content. I would say from here on out, every single scenario warrants more description. I do think this back portion of the game is somewhat worse as compared to like the front 7 scenarios, but I think we can chalk that up to the game definitely expecting a larger party of units by this point. I had feared that the end game was going to be as easy as the middle section of this very wide parabola that represents the experience, but no, you needn't worry, I did suffer to get us to this ending. Not yet, mind you. The suffering is interspersed, like a sprinkling of peppercorn in your yogurt that you've mistaken for blackberry bits. And while this stage is not going to look like pain right now, put a pin in that, we'll be coming back to it. But for now, how does it work? So, it looks like a standard stage, just 2 sides, mush in the middle, violence, done, you know the deal. And while a lot of units are going to die here, again, coming back to that, the wave tactics are what's actually making this interesting. So do you see this Devil Gundam right here? As long as it's stealing my plan of camping on bases, enemy reinforcements are not going to stop coming for any reason. Only until it is destroyed will they stop, but otherwise, every time there are only 8 enemies left on the map, 2 groups of 3 G-Bits and 1 Grandmaster Gundam are going to arrive from the north and south. So far, so fine. Trouble is, once part 2 starts, the God Gundam is going to rush here, and I can't afford to have any enemies in the north group remaining. In retrospect, I probably could have deployed Spoon Psyche to give him a massive movement boost. If you are subjecting yourself to this and are okay with parts and units being used for non-combat reasons, definitely a better choice than I made here, but I forgot, so I had to clear specific enemies while keeping others around. Honestly, at this point, I'll take it. The Frost Brothers are still here, so they're gonna need to go. Their ranges are way too massive to leave around. The Devil Gundams flanking the base are also going to be targets. They don't need to per se, but I have the turns and they will destroy themselves on counterattacks in that time, so I may as well clear the harder enemies now, right? I do want to leave the Daughters Neos as they have 2 less range than the G-Bits. Otherwise, anything above the Master Asia Devil Gundam has to go. So we are keeping 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the original enemies and 1 group from the lower reinforcements. DM? Yeah, I do that. Great, okay. So, because the Devil Gundam is the one making the units, if it dies and there are 8 enemies remaining, that's fine. I have been weakening him along the way, so one final tap and farewell Master Asia. He draws his final breath. Duminus shows up and he acts like we've invested no points into our upgrades, but I remembered to pack a backup super robot and all's fine. Trouble comes from Domon, like I mentioned before. The God Gundam has but one part slot, and the God Gundam also does not have movement to begin with, so even with a Mega Booster, he is still in danger. And here is where I needed those northern enemies dead. I have snuck the Rakai Loom across the top edge of the map and have it within 2 turns of Domon's movement. Then, Bright can excel and get them both out of there. Ooh. Or, well, maybe I am bad at math. That's what I thought I counted, but I guess I was 1 tile short, so 3 turns to get him out of there. Duminus is sure going to try and punish me for this mistake, but I just make it outside his range. He is going to try and give chase, but base Duminus is way too weak to hold up for long, so more circle strats are required, but it's not like he was going to attack me anyway, if basically every other boss by now has been anything to go by. With him dead, for the time being, the remainder of the mission is just cleaning up the dregs, and we are out of the final round split. We've come so far on this journey, you and I. I set out to ruin Super Robot Wars R with nothing but the excellence, my intelligent planning, interesting strats, and financial superiority of overwhelming funds. Really mostly just that last one. Unfortunately, Duminus had other plans for this video because that last attack he landed on us cost us all of the excellence frames, and a new one's going to take more than just an intermission to make. So, if all the other little exceptions had not disqualified me, Scenario 32 is where this challenge must stop following conventional rules. But I hate those mid-video YouTube fakeouts, so instead let's you and I hypothesize. What's more interesting? I go, well, nothing more to do for it, and just quit, leaving the game nearly but entirely unfinished. Or I can use one of my previous exceptions and make an increasingly baroque set of stipulations to clear this hurdle. Yeah? You said the second one? Glad I decided that my theoretical straw man of you agreed in my video. Now, where does that leave us? What's the infraction and what's the solve? Scenario 32 opens without the use of the excellence, and you only regain it once every enemy is destroyed. That means somebody has to deal damage to get us there, thus breaking our rules. What's a robot to do? I'll give you 3 more seconds to think of a previous exception that got us out of this. 3, 2, 1. Maybe the pressure of a timer makes you feel like your head's about to explode, but that is, in fact, the correct answer. I'm going to throw all of my benched units at the enemies like grenades. What could possibly go wrong? Actually, a good deal, kind of, could go wrong. There are just so many limiting factors here. The greatest trouble is there are so few pilots that actually have self-destruct. The options are 4 Murasame, Hero Yui, Duo Maxwell, Trevor Barton, Capture Roberba Winner, Wu Fei Chang, Boss, and Keiko Kamikita. Trouble is, Wu Fei and Keiko do not get this spear to start with, and the level at which they learn it is way too far away, even if I tried to optimize their levels. And short of some tedious grinding, I really didn't want to employ that strat. That leaves us with 6 pilots, though 4 comes with an incredible bonus in the form of being a Gundam pilot, which has access to a snap-off unit. When a pilot uses self-destruct, it only destroys the present unit, not the unit in total. So, if I were to use self-destruct in something like the Riga Z or the fully armored Double Zeta for instance, it only loses the snap-off portion. For our purposes, it's effectively, basically, another pilot. 7 pilots is not bad. They could, at maximum, take out 28 enemies, but realistically, getting a pilot completely surrounded is very hard. Just being in that position is going to cost them a lot of HP, and that does take away from the self-destruct damage. Bosses also tend to have more health than player units, so I'm going to need to allocate 2 or more self-destructs to clearing those. It's probably safer to assume 3 enemies per self-destruct for a total of 21 enemies. So then, what am I going to be dealing with? Planning for anything isn't really that much help, so let me hone in on what I need here. There are 17 units present. Fortunately, no reinforcements for the bomb portion of this scenario, but 5 enemies do have over 5 digits of HP, so let me add 5 to that total, and whoops, we need 22 self-destructs. We are able to drop that number down to 1, so it's an even 21-21 by our next plan, and that's HP. I figured that since I did it before and I'm already breaking the rules, what's the real harm? I had enough funds to buy all these units up to max HP, so let's see where that starts us. The Wing Gundam boys are all going to be stuck in their models, but 4 and Boss can borrow some beefier machines. 4's best choice here is by far the previously mentioned fully armored Double Zeta. Even if it did not have that extra armor snap-off mode, it would still be the best with its considerably higher base HP, but with 2 health bars, it's easy. Boss also has a non-choice in the form of the Great Mazinger. Now, here is where I waste about 3 to 4 hours of that runtime. I also have part slots on these units, and for some unknowable reason, I thought giving them movement was going to be the best option. I guessed to put them in position if a group of 3 enemies showed up, but that was dumb and very much not the call, as using every HP armor part I owned barely only got the job done in the actual clear. This project is really just an excuse for me to play the actual best game ever, Excel spreadsheets, so obviously I needed to make a spreadsheet for this to figure out who got what part. The Devil Ice Davalas have less HP than any of my units at base, so they are a non-factor. But outside of them, I wanted to look at what thresholds of enemy unit HP I could clear with correct math. Ideally, the 10,350 HP of the dungeon would also have a 1 unit solve. There are a couple of setups that allow my units to hit a total that high, but only one that had every other unit but one, the Death Scythe. Okay, technically 2, the D-Armor Double Zeta, but that doesn't really count for reasons we'll explain later, clearing the 9,200 HP of the Majin as well. The Double Zeta only kind of counts here because half of it can't clear that 9,200, and someone would point it out if I didn't mention it. Since the point was to make a single dungeon one-shottable, one unit on our team is only going to need the requisite HP. A bonus to this setup also means that all of those units but the 2 I just mentioned are also going to be two-shotting every boss, with the highest need being 9,000 HP for half of the Ashtaron Hermit Crab's total of 18,000. The only other bits of math worth noting here are the Double Zeta. Like I said, it was going to come back. Surprisingly, it's not as effective as I was expecting it to be. I mean, it is still, again, 2 instances of self-destruct, but, like, outside of that part. The HP of the full armor and the base forms are very nearly 2,000 HP apart. Taking the fully armored Double Zeta to that 10,350 was not actually making the base Double Zeta clear any additional enemies, so any more investment than I gave it would just be wasteful one of the 2 sides. But the fully armored form does still reach the second highest HP in order to clear the Tetsuchins. Okay, sorry, I know that was a lot of numbers and I probably lost some people in there, but I did say spreadsheet, so I'm not sure what you were expecting. With my damage sorted, the rest of the team just needs pilots that can heal all the damage taken and get enemies into position. The Daitarn is also force deployed here, and it has one of the highest base armors, and Banjo is also one of the highest base defenses, so I gave him HP and armor too, equipping whatever remaining Chobham armors I had left, and I knew with that I could send him in to soak up a lot of the hits and get enemies where I needed them to be. I'm not going to call out the rest of the pilots by name here, just know that they were the ones that had trust and faith and also the highest SP totals among them. Okay, that was preps. I know it was a lot. Sorry, but if you made it this far into a video, I figured you probably like this level of crunch. Still, you are an absolute ace pilot in my heart for sitting through all of that. Now, let's get to smashing stuff. I want to open with as much destruction as possible. It leaves me with better context for future turns, rather than having me ended up with wasted potential. The Double Zeta is going to go first. Every one of the Double Zeta's moves is going to be exact here. It's primarily to get 4 in range of enemies and draw them into those clusters of 3. If I move anywhere else, they're going to still be in range, but just so that I can't manipulate them easily, and they're going to be using long-ranged attacks rather than being up close. So, for that same reason, I'm also going to be moving another unit into range. Anyone will do, but extra movement is useful here, so I use the Black Serena. A Denjin would get in my way if I didn't do this, thus enclosing that 3-sided configuration that 4 wants to get into next turn. And would you look at that? It's not just any 3 units, but 3 of the highest HP units. Perfect, off to a great start. And like I said during the intermission, the Double Zeta only sheds its armor during self-destruct, so a second self-destruct is going to be coming up real quick. I could go for more high HP targets with that second explosion, but now with what feels like an early lead, I'd much rather clear out density, making movement easier in the future for my other units. Also, the HP values of my units are probably going to be changing a lot, but if I stop down to note every time I use a trust or a faith, just this scenario alone could be an extended cut of a movie, and we don't have time for that. I'm going to use the healing spirits off screen when the time is right. If the next enemy phase would kill my pilot, bringing them to just above that stat is going to be the call, otherwise I'm waiting. And then, once there's the bomb turn, that's when they get the full heal. So here, I have 2 choices of an opening, and I'm going to opt for the top one, banking on the pathfinding the bosses, moving in close to me and getting me within melee range. And would you look at that, to my great surprise? A success! With my opening set, my next priorities are twofold. First, the Daitarn soaks hits and moves enemies around, from which position I can move in my next demolition pilot. Second, I want to focus on the Frost Brothers. Like previous scenarios, they always want to be orthogonally adjacent, and that is just very much not the setup for this plan. So, they super cannot be the last enemies that are left alive. There is another gap of 3 forming here. I want to keep it that way, so I'm going to move the Daitarn in, and only move back out once the next unit is in place. We're going to use the Great Massacre for this one. It was designed to deal with the Denjin, and the Denjin is just moved in place, so my hand is forced. Again, absolutely ideal in what happens once I move the Ditarn away. A Devil Ice Divalis moves into the right position, allowing for a second time a set of 4 to be blown up. The situation may look good now, but there are still 3 bosses with 2 instances of explosion left, so it's not as free as it looks. After that last maneuver, I do have the Frost Brothers separated, and while it's very tempting to stay in this position, no one is going to be moving from it anytime soon, and that isn't going to work. I do think there is a cleaner position from here. I bring it up as a challenge for the audience. Use the maps I provided down in the comments and see if you can think of a better option for me than breaking this diagonal here. Down is the only direction that gets one of the Frost Brothers to move into a group of 3, so down it's going to be, and Duo's in the middle this time, cleaning up what the double Zeta started and getting 1 Frost in range for the next round of self-destructs. That leaves us just with 2 bosses now that have full HP, and even if I have 4 potential explosion points with 1 unit, I can't use 2 on 1 boss, so either Genpachiro or Olba is going to need to be part of the next formation. Or this works? 2 units each between the bosses will also get the job done. They're close to the Ditarn, so no fear of them moving anymore. It's been a long scenario and I'm kind of running low on health, so I'm sending the whole team in now to potentially absorb hits from the other pilots. We gotta go. Even a few small hits on the remaining units will mean that their explosions are just not going to cut it. Really, with just 1 more character, this setup would be such a breeze. Because right now, I'm working with this, and just like I said, no healing, and 1 too many hits, and I don't have the HP to blow up right. I did need to get at least 1 more stumble in here. I can't have y'all thinking that I'm doing every one of these scenarios perfectly on the first go. These opening sets and closing sets needed many, many restarts. I stress again, this one scenario took over 10 hours to complete, and that last bomb brings us to the end of those 10 hours. Now it's just moving in both my final pilot and sending everyone else left into the battleships. 1 final big red button. Oh, right. There is a whole second half of this scenario that's going on, and it still needs doing. But in a brand new Excellence. The Excellence Eternal. It's kind of a bit of a ripoff that its best attack is melee and not ranged. Would have been pretty cool if they had scaled both pilots' final robots to their strengths, but what can you do? Maybe pick round next time, I guess, but I still think that dodging early matters, and the 2.5% extra damage is not going to make a difference when we run into the problems at the end. Also, all of the map problems that I've addressed before. Anyway, because the battleships are close by, I do need Fiona to intercept pretty quickly while also moving towards that satellite. Fortunately, since it is still a form of the Excellence, the parts I had equipped last scenario are still on here, so no fear of death. I just need the satellite for energy regen to speed things along a little. Ooh, it does feel like it's been a bit since I didn't have 100% accuracy on anything other than a final boss of a scenario. So I do want to engage these Hokushin 6 either with melee to add that missing 20% for my ranged options, or use something like a focus or a bullseye. Or instead, I could opt for none of these things and just let luck handle it nicely. The Yatenko does have eyes on a different target, so the energy regen is really only short-lived. Wanting to take no risks of potentially repeating that whole rigmarole, a bullseye that will also last into enemy phase for the Hokushin 6 too, and a Valor will finish off the Yatenko, and the remaining Mirza die to counters on the enemy phase. I want to pause on this unit repair screen to see the utter destruction that was wrought by this plan. Yeah, a few support units went down too, but I couldn't be bothered to reset for them since we were already in magical non-canon land. I have to say, this is definitely my favorite clear by far, which begs the question, was this entire project flawed from the start? Should maybe I have reconsidered the entire premise of this video if the one element that doesn't follow the rules is more interesting than the 36 other parts that do? We're in for another long one with Scenario 3, but fortunately, it's because there is a lot going on. Our team opens on the top right, and the usual move down to the bottom left formation is established. The caveats here are twofold, though. There are 4 multi-step bosses at the starting position, and it's also just the longest map. The 4 nearby bosses all have Chaser AI in their second form, so I'm only going to release each of them from their tanky prison one at a time. Similar to the map with the Nadeshiko captured, which boss goes first is going to be in the context of their movement and nothing else. They are all a not-so-clean 4-hit kill, but a level or 2 more in Fiona may have taken that down to a 3-hit kill. The battleships here are going to perform that same circular maneuver that we did before, while the Excellence picks off each boss one at a time. Fortunately, the Neeble guns in which the bosses are trapped have just absolutely abysmal movement, and they will even just sit still if there's a chasm right in front of them. Their 7 range attack does force a reset 1 or 2 times, but it's pretty easy to work around if you're not being as careless as I was. Valtori is the first boss to go, as I can access him early into the mission, so far so that I'm actually ahead of the turn he's going to start moving. Better to clear one of the 7 move options if I can kind of get one of those for free. I did end up positioning the battleships poorly here, so it does cost me a Valor to clear him, and most of the bosses are going to be close calls, but I can give the battleships a little bit more clearance as the mission progresses. So to establish that distance, a 6-move unit is going to be next, Nendal. And while it is just 1 move difference, over a few turns that does add up, and he is the furthest of the 2. He, fortunately, goes down easily. Next up is Edwin. While he is the closer of the 2 bosses to the battleship at this point, I am pretty confident that I can get Zenoya stuck on this cliff phase here, giving me much more time to deal with her 7 movement. Let me also take the time to say right now, it's a shame that all of these units are basically the same. There's really no difference between them. They're so colorful and could have such personality, but instead they all just have basic HP regen, roughly the same health, and attacks. Nendal is a slight bit different, but he shows up the least. They're really maybe some of the most disappointing bosses in the game, in my opinion. And also, like, Valtori is maybe racist? I think it might be racist. Could someone tell me in the comments if this is supposed to be, like, tribal in design, and if the show actually handles it well? Should I feel bad about playing this game? Early anime designs really got away with some stuff, I mean, modern designs get away with too much too, though, so maybe forward isn't always progress. We really do need to expect better from our media. During that important aside, Edwin's magic carpet is also taking him to a whole new world. That world is hell. He's dead. That leaves only Zenoya remaining. I should have waited to move the battleship until the Excellence could position itself 1 tile above the Neeble gun. It definitely feels like there's a lot of small optimizations throughout the course of this run, this scenario especially, though I'm not sure how many of those would be relevant if you opted for a different unit than the Excellence. Zenoya does have the lowest HP out of the 4 bosses, but that doesn't actually save us a turn, sadly. She does get squashed like a bug though, and I'm on to Kuros and her guard. I'm not sure how interesting it was to watch me fight these 4 bosses, but getting the movement right here did actually feel good. The length of the map is usually a death sentence for efficiencies and clears, but running from the bosses still had this close tension. It's almost claustrophobic because the range of the bottom left-hand enemies here, it extends a lot farther than I was accounting for. I would like the game to have this amount of pressure at around like the medium point of difficulty, say. I definitely feel like I needed to consider my positioning a lot more in this map than many other scenarios, and I could do with being asked to consider that a lot more often. The Kuros guards here are a bit stronger than the usual fare of what you would expect from their designs, and she is in an II, so for once I'm happy that the boss is not attacking me, else I might accidentally start the real fight. With the guards gone, Kuros follows the lead of her generals and books it at the battleship. I originally just parked them in the upper right-hand corner, expecting that would make Kuros take the greatest amount of time to close the distance, but no, actually we could do a little bit better than that. Leaving the battleship in the top left corner means Kuros is only ever going to cover a vertical distance immediately, and with some well-timed movement, force her to cover horizontal distance later. Our middle school geometry is going to come in handy here for once and tell us that the longest side of the triangle, the hypotenuse for the math and language nerds among us, myself included, it cannot be longer than the combined sum of the other 2 sides. So while it won't be perfect, it does give me a couple of extra turns, and would you look at that, 2 was just the number that I needed. That said, this behavior does not bode well, since Don Zalcer has much more health and armor than Kuros did, and I barely cleared her in time. Also, I'm across the map when he shows up, so if he's gonna rush the battleships, he's gonna get a head start. But, oh, well, he sure isn't moving. I've definitely seen him move before. Genuinely, every turn was tense because I was expecting him to start going. I really went through the stages of grief trying to debate which new arbitrary threshold I was setting in my head was going to start him moving. Turns out that threshold was 0% as his weird little light bulb head goes spinning off into the cosmos. I failed to mention this on the previous boss kill, but Kuros does drop the second horror that we were looking for, so if you thought we were untouchable before, it's like we started playing a different Super Robot Wars now. And yet again, the endgame tries to ruin my dreams. The Nadeshiko has been hit and it isn't going to move anywhere. This obviously poses a challenge when I have a crescent moon shape of enemies around me to open. I'm just gonna need to have to hope that I look like a more reasonable target for some reason. Wait, what's this? The Devil Ice Devils are gonna play along with my plan? Huh, maybe this is doable. I do need to stand 1 space away from the Nadeshiko, or I am gonna invalidate the run. Enough deploys in previous scenarios and some turns next to each other here, and Fiona and Yuriko are going to develop a rivalry, and that's an extra 5% that does count as helping, and we can't have that. I can stand close before the rivalry kicks in, though, so that does give me a few adjacent turns. The Excellence does kind of need to stay in the center line to keep the enemy's attention, but there are two problems here. The bosses that are Saburauta and Genpachiro. The Nadeshiko is in their range, and to them, I'm as important of a target as the story is to my experience with this game. Which is to say non-existent. It is a bit of a flubbed rule on my part, but I can go nowhere else to stop them attacking that doesn't also let a different attack through. I figure, since it's being absorbed by that distortion field, is it really that bad? It could be actual damage, but the energy cost is less than the energy gain, so really, if you close one eye, take a step back, close the other eye, Yuriko has the same stats at the beginning of each player phase, so did she really go to combat? The second trouble here is the litany of bosses rushing in from the west. One of them I can, however, I think, do something about. The Utenko goes down no problem with one Valor, but Genichiro and the Daimajin will stay for a bit, also stuck in the limbo of attacking a distortion field for no progress made. I do choose the Oko, the Utenko, because it has no gravity-based weapon and therefore could not also join in the shield-based shenanigans we've been seeing. The Hokushin 6 are back again and are still quite dodgy, despite my over-leveling and 2 Haro, but no SP is necessary beyond this point, so a quick bullseye will do the trick. When there are only 8 enemies remaining on the map, a wave of Shishiki will arrive, an event that can trigger up to 5 times if a unit does not land on the Tulip here. They fold like all generics do at this point, and will die before they ever reach the Nadeshiko though. They start far enough back that while they approach, I can finish off one of the remaining bosses. Repeat this 3 times, and that's practically all. 3 Generation 2 Devil Gundams wait at the Chula, but they've long since been demoted from the status of boss, so they're not posing any challenge now. Only 3 scenarios left. What challenging new takes on level design could we see now? The boss is invincible? Oh, wait, no, he respawns? Just infinitely? That's dumb. Yeah, the rest of the run is exceptions now, and I don't have a good way to get around it, sorry. I do think this project was a bit flawed from the start, but I do think it's a neat proof of concept for future titles. So, Scenario 35, A Stormy Sea, is a defeat enemy map. The only trouble is one enemy is undefeatable. The mission prompts you to send Vega to the artificial moon tiles, these red ones over here, for the sake of the story, but it also makes Vector retreat, thus solving the respawn problem. But that does mean I need to move a unit that we aren't technically using, so we had a problem with it before, I kind of have to take a problem with it here. I think the only fair way to handle this deviation, though, is to clear everything else out first, and then send her in. The rest of the map is a breeze, with the same bosses we've seen before, still unable to attack the Excellence meaningfully, and they are far away from the battleship this time, so I don't even need to bother moving to avoid them. The final enemies, 3 Generation 3 Devil Gundams with generic pilots, and also the Elios to complete the Angel set, they do show up when someone moves onto the Shield Moon. It's also, for some reason, a base tile, so Fiona wants to be there anyway. The only reason I don't move onto them sooner is because I don't want the other bosses getting the HP regen as they circle strafe around me. The Devil Gundams do have HP regen natively, so that plus the base healing means we're not making any progress on counterattacks in the slightest, unless of course it's against the one I attacked on player phase. But, like, that's also nothing, it's just extra turns added on. With the bosses we can destroy destroyed, Vega ships out to the Shield Moon, and Vector's Vector sends him after her, and we are free to move on to the penultimate scenario. When I originally set out to make these videos, Scenario 36 was the one that had me worried. Maybe I should have tried to make a different video, knowing that I might fail moments before the goalpost, but hubris and a lack of forethought are friends to ambition. And was first draft Austin right? Absolutely. The gimmick of this stage, and I do think it's a gimmick, is that the 2 bosses at the end of the second part, yeah, sorry, we're just gonna skip the first part, they both need to die on the same turn. If they don't, they come back to life with full HP. Remember all those easy clears with no boss attacks? Well, I'm paying for it now. I don't know what I need to do to get them to attack me. I'm sure having lower parameters would probably help, but taking off both of the Haros did nothing, and I can't unallocate upgrade points. This was about 25 hours of recording to get through this full playthrough, and I'm not about to start from scratch. Test which level of upgrade caused this behavior, because frankly, we all have better things to do with our time than to watch me play the same scenario like 15 times. I do think it's probably possible to get them to cooperate based on how early game bosses went, but I'm not sure if that bungles up any of the clears in between. What I do know is that lowering 2 50,000 strong HP pulls with HP regen and one of the bosses having a 50% chance to not take damage is not fun. My vote for the worst level of the game. It's not just because I'm salty, the gimmick just doesn't matter when you play normally. You just shred both bosses on the same turn anyway with Valor boosts, support attacks, and rivalry bonuses, and it's like it's not even there. It seems to only exist to spite this challenge type in particular, and that's lame and not creative at all. I know I could just use self-destruct on one again, but there's a lot of fussing with HPs, so I'm just going to give it to the Dendo. They deserve some win after all the grief I give them, and it's not really going to change the outcome of next scenario at all. You've seen me kill plenty of generics already, we don't need to linger, let's get to the good bad part. This little configuration right here is a bit of a stinker, don't you know? The three bosses that I've been calling angels, Tis in the Thugater, Lalia in the Hypocrisis, and Despinas in the Elios, they bring Dominus back to life every time he dies, so long as they are still all on the field. Well, what's the big deal? Just kill them first. Great plan, just they don't move and are next to a boss with support defense. I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but that's only because I've made it not a big deal throughout the course of this playthrough. I've been keeping bosses moving so that they can't be next to each other that much, or at the very least, I've been aiming at the ones who weren't already adjacent. Here, there is no such luxury. I need to attack one of the three girls, doesn't matter who, forcing damage onto Dominus with his support defenses until he gets low enough that another support defense would destroy him. The wrinkle here is the HP regen. Here is the amount each boss recovers every turn. But slide that chart over because we also need that second column. It's not one turn, but 2 turns that we're counting here because I need to take 1 turn off from hitting either Dominus or my real target to hit the other, thus giving them that turn of recovery in addition to the turn when they are being attacked. Do you see the problem? I can use Valor to deal with one of them, but the description betrays itself in that it's only one of them. Attacking Dominus will do the exact same effect, but in reverse. It's going to send damage to one of the adjacent bosses, such that they're going to be brought low, but very, very, very slowly. Fiona deals between 32 and 3500 damage on each attack, and I don't have enough energy to always use the more powerful ones. The Elios also heals 2800 HP a turn, so at the most I'm taking about 4 to 700 HP chunks off of a nearly 30k HP health bar. None of this accounts for potential, which makes progress even slower. I also need to do it twice because they have super repair kits. It's completely safe, it's just monstrously tedious for a strat that might not work. With some heavy use of speed-ups later, we can all see how poor a plan that I had. 1 turn off of damage for the Elios means 3080 HP back, or about 4 turns worth of progress. Well, I can't do more than 4 turns worth of damage to Dominus in one go. The only way I could make real progress was if I was attacking the Elios for over 8,000 points of damage, and therefore Dominus for about 4,000 damage. This current setup is pretty close, but it's just not quite there, and also the Elios is not really the whole of our problems. They all just recover way too much, and the Hypocrisis is still left, and they have the most HP out of the 3 sisters. Fiona is level 33 here, and it's just not cutting it. I asked you to bank scenario 31 in your heads earlier, and here is where it's going to become relevant, because I think, unfortunately, the solution is just to grind so much, just so much. In that scenario, I mentioned that enemies arrive endlessly, and I do mean endlessly. Destruction always awards more XP than Chip, and even 1 more point is worth it for how slow this is going to go. I could theoretically do the same here with just chipping bosses, but that's also way more tedious. The upside is, though, that these bosses are not going to scale in level with whatever our elevated Fiona is going to be. For the sake of completing the video, I've just leveled to 99, and I've left myself a note that future Austin can deal with the exact level necessary to make progress. Oh, well, I guess that makes me future Austin, so let's do some math. Hiya, future, also kind of unscripted Austin here. I just finished doing the math, and it is both more complicated and much more straightforward than I was expecting. Let's break it down. So our problem elements are Dominus Triton and the Hypocrisis Dominus combination. So our first problem is Dominus Triton. He has 65,000 HP, which means he regens 6,500 HP a turn. Now, there's a little other element that we need to account for before we actually get into like the hard math of it. Most of these pilots have had potential, it's just not been a factor we needed to account for, but when our damage numbers are so small and the HP totals are so large, we're going to have to factor it in here. Dominus as a pilot has potential, but that's also going to scale as his level changes. I was fighting a level 28 Dominus, so I'm going to use that as my point of reference here. This might change as you increase or decrease your level values, but the same principle is going to apply. So my Dominus pilot had a level 6 potential, which means at its most potent level, it's going to be offering 125 armor. I want to factor that into account for the entirety of my calculation because it's going to be the hardest threshold to cross. Admittedly, we're going to be doing more damage than my calculations are going to say at first, but that HP matters much less than those last critical hit points. If, once we get to that last potential threshold, we're doing less damage than he is healing, it doesn't actually matter that we did a lot more damage early on. So here are the numbers. If this is too much math for you, don't worry, you can just skip ahead to this timestamp. I'll summarize what level Fiona needs to be in order to be able to clear all of these challenges with a very brief explanation as to why then. But if you like math, here's the breakdown. With max potential, Dominus is going to have 1,825 armor in his Triton form. We don't actually care about the Deuteron form because it's going to be less than the Triton, so as long as we can clear the Triton, we can clear the second form too. Because this is going to be such a long process, I'm also just going to be assuming that all the bosses have 150 morale, so we're taking that into account also. When Dominus has 150 morale, 183 defense, and 1,825 armor from the Dominus Triton, we need to be dealing 9,540 damage before defense adjustments. That way we will deal exactly 6,501 points of damage. One more point than he is healing every turn. This is admittedly wildly slow, but I did promise that I was going to figure out what the lowest level was to make progress, and this is it. In order to hit that 6,501 points of damage when he has max potential, Fiona just needs to be at level 60. Once Fiona reaches level 60, she's going to have 210 range damage. Using the range damage value does mean that we have a weapon that has considerably less power, 5,300 versus 5,800, but Fiona's melee attack, Final Grand Cross, only can be used 20 times before she runs out of energy. And at this rate, at 1 point of damage of progress a turn, 20 turns just isn't going to cut it. We're going to need to rely on the ranged option, the one that can be used indefinitely, to figure out the math here. With that problem solved, I figured that was going to make everything else very easy. Surely if we can clear the final boss, that means we can clear the rest of the bosses beforehand. But no, unfortunately, the little formation that we have going on here with the Hypocrisis and Dominus Proton is actually more difficult. The problem is Dominus Proton is going to be taking half damage because of the support defense here, so any number we're looking at is actually cut in half. Because of this, we're going to need to be at a considerably higher level to make this happen. We're going to look at two different factors here. First, let's look at this ranged value, because as I said, it's an infinite use attack. In order for Fiona to be able to attack the Hypocrisis, thus dealing damage to the Dominus through the support defense, with enough damage that Dominus is not regenning enough a turn, we need to be at level 96 in order to get this job done. Let me explain why. Dominus restores 2,000 HP a turn in his Proton form. That's very manageable. The Hypocrisis restores 3,300 points of HP a turn. That's a little bit more of a problem. As I mentioned during this non-math segment, it's not just one turn that we need to worry about, it's 2 or sometimes even 3 turns that are a problem. If the combination of Dominus's remaining HP and the amount that he has recovered allows him to tank for 2 turns for the Hypocrisis, we're never going to be making progress. That would be 3 turns of regen for the Hypocrisis, and we would need to be doing 12,294 points of damage before defenses are factored in. In order to reach that threshold, Fiona would need to be level 163. We can't go above 99, so that obviously can't be the solution. We're gonna need to figure out how to keep Hypocrisis from getting 3 turns of regen. Even 2 turns of regen is doable. We would only need to do 8,994 points of damage per turn before defenses in order to be able to clear that 2 HP regen threshold. In order to keep Dominus on this 1 turn on, 1 turn off regen cycle, we're going to need to deal more than 2 times his HP regen a turn, so 4,001 points of damage. And in order to reach that threshold, like I said, we need to be level 96 with our ranged options. That's too many levels. Surely somewhere in there something is going to have to change, and in fact, actually it does. See, because the final Grand Cross takes so much energy to use, I wasn't factoring it in at first, but there is a point where the ranged option stops being as viable as the melee option does, because we can do it faster than 20 turns. Actually, what we're looking at is only level 67 for Fiona, because of the way in which her melee scales. At that level, you can use the final Grand Cross on the Hypocrisis to destroy it before 20 turns are up. Or very nearly there with some like blocking critical shenanigans, but With this explanation, I think you'll be able to figure out how to manage that. We just need to play a little bit more creative before we actually get to that point of using it. So we can't start with Dominus and the Hypocrisis at max HP before we start using Final Grand Cross. We need to reduce Dominus's HP to a critical threshold before we get to that point, with any attack honestly, but ideally Reactor Flash, that's the name of the ranged attack we've been using. Once he is brought down to a point where he can no longer support attack for the Hypocrisis for a turn, that's when you move in and start attacking with the Final Grand Cross. At that point, you're going to be trading which boss is taking damage each turn. Ideally, the pattern should go Dominus, Hypocrisis, Hypocrisis, and then repeat the cycle. More turns between Dominus damage is better, any fewer turns between Dominus damage is just untenable. At the rate you are going, this will take out the Hypocrisis, barring any other odd shenanigans of abilities happening. But at that point, if you take a step back and then use the Reactor Flash again a couple turns, that will regen your HP and keep both bosses at a neutral level. You're not going to make any progress, but they're also not really going to make much progress in restoring their HP. You get back energy enough that you can do this for 2 or 3 turns and then go back to attacking, and that will put Hypocrisis at a point where Dominus can't protect her anymore and she will die to your next attack. The trouble here is though, she does have a super repair kit, so we also have to do this process twice to make it happen, but as far as I can tell, level 67 is the first time that this is actually going to work. It is the threshold that, when applying damage to Dominus Proton, it is the first time that you cross that 4,000 point threshold while also factoring in the half damage from support defense. With that math done, let's summarize and figure out where we are. First, Fiona only needs to be at level 67 to be able to clear all of the bosses involved. The final major threshold, Dominus Triton, only requires you be level 60 to be able to clear him using the Reactor Flash attack. We don't have enough time or energy to be able to use Final Grand Cross to finish him off, even if we were level 99. In order to be able to clear the first part of this boss section, we need to be at level 67 with Fiona such that she can use Final Grand Cross a couple of times to finish off the Hypocrisis once Dominus has already been lowered to a critical HP threshold. So actually, it's not that much grinding. It's a lot less than I was expecting. Like I said earlier, the easiest way to get to that level is probably in Scenario 31, where you have an infinite number of enemies spawning and you're going to get more XP out of them dying rather than just chipping them. But that does mean the bosses are going to scale up a little bit more, and I didn't do the math that way, and our numbers are looking a little bit close, so that's going to make things a little bit more difficult. Probably, if you actually want to take on this challenge, it's best to just grind in this scenario against the bosses. Sorry, that is phenomenally slow, but I think that's what this scenario demands. This is my best shot at the math. If someone sees something that I am missing, please let me know. I think I did everything correctly, but I have been staring at this for 4 hours and I'm starting to go cross-eyed. Be kind to me in the comments, but be clarifying if I did miss something. I'll happily go back and check some math with a clarifying video if I mess something up. Okay, future Austin gone, returning to the video now. Thanks everybody, bye. Now, with this massive spike in power, the remaining fights are easy. The remaining angels are taking between 8 to 10k damage on a crit, so they're gonna falter in just a few turns. Dominus Proton is very low at this point, so he goes 1 turn later. But, like all good JRPG bosses, that was just phase 1, and his name reflects it too. Dominus Deuteron arrives, mercifully with none of his allies though. Still no attacking, mind you. I can't imagine what the final boss could be waiting for, really. It would solve such a great deal of issues if these bosses just tried to hit me for once. But with the greatest of assets, over-leveling, Fiona deals more than double his regen a turn. He does not last long. But, as they say, 3 times closes the monkey's paw, and Dominus Triton arrives for the real absolute last actual final boss. Even at level 99, I'm only dealing 7,700 damage. That's only 1,100 points of making progress. That's a lot higher than before with the angels, but it really shows how necessary a mammoth level jump is to actually accomplish this task solo. No rules are broken here, fortunately, just incredibly tedious and frankly pretty boring solves to the last problem of the campaign. One final Grand Cross, and credits roll on Super Robot Wars and my first scripted video on this channel. Gotta say, what a surprising journey this has been. If I'm going to keep doing these kind of scripted videos, I'd like to have a couple of summative thoughts, just what I've learned from this process at the end. So here goes. First, I've definitely grown a new appreciation for the Excellence Gunner, and I would like to try it out a little bit more prominently in a future playthrough of R. It really held up when I kept throwing a lot of very difficult asks of it here, so I have to say, I'm kind of impressed. I think it's moved up probably 1 or 2 ranks in my tier list of the Excellence frames. And second, I'm feeling a little bit more confident about how targeting priority works. I don't feel like I have it quite nailed down yet, but I would like to carry through some of this logic into future titles and see if I can keep experimenting with it there. I hope you all enjoyed your time. I gotta say, despite everything, I'm actually pretty pleasantly surprised with how things turn out. I know that the ending kind of fell apart there, but, you know, at the very least, it makes me want to keep asking these sorts of questions, but maybe with a little bit better focus next time. Something like, what if I use a different pilot, one that has spirits that will solve the problems that I've encountered here? What if I only give myself 30 points of upgrades instead of the maximum 60? I think I could go on with a lot of these sort of nuanced questions, but I have one final, much more important question, but for all of you. So, do you remember I asked you to hold on to the thoughts about needing to make some rules exceptions like way in the beginning of the video? Well, I did not forget. So, here's your question. Can you do better? And I do mean that as a challenge. Like, I want you to tell me or show me how you could clear these scenarios better than I did. We can even keep it on theme here. We can call them SR points, but like for this channel. Here's the bounty I'm going to put on myself. We want scenario 4 of the Gundam Path, scenario 32 to see if you can get the Excellence earlier, scenario 34 to keep the Nadeshiko fully out of combat, and just 36 and 37 in general. You don't have to answer all of them, even a half answer for one of them is fine. If you do already have a video, I will gladly direct people to it. If you have an idea but you can't show it for whatever reason, I'll happily try it out, obviously with credits and attributions. But I would like to make this a little bit more of a community project. I think we could all stand to think a little bit more about these games, and I would like to encourage us all to do so by showing someone on the internet what's up. Also, this challenge is only just the beginning, so I'm not exactly sure how this process is going to work, but I figure we can build it along the way, and we can just suit whatever the community ends up needing. I've said it before, and I will say it again, I'm not here for any of the YouTube algorithm nonsense. I'm issuing this challenge not for any clout, but because I really want you to go out and think, to play, and to cooperate with everyone else about how you can play and how you can think. Because really, isn't that the point of the video game challenge at the end of the day? Thank you to my supporters Sandra, the Slayer of Games, and Jackaloon over on Patreon. You have and continue to keep me motivated to make this project the best possible thing it can be. And thank you everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you in the stars.